Hey everyone, you are being gaslit into believing that civil commitment is the answer to treating mental illness and addiction. We are your whistleblowing shrinks, Dr. Teralyn and Therapist Jenn, and this is the Gaslit Truth Podcast. Welcome
It
to the
sure
show.
is. Woohoo. This is a good topic. But
We're
before
here.
we get started, I am doing another shameless self-promotion for my book.
Do
Here
it.
it is. Your Best Brain.
Do it.
Do it.
You know
So
what?
this book,
Terry, wait.
go ahead.
I want you to open the very first page, please. And I want you to
Yes.
can you share with people the line on the very first page of that book?
100%. When life knocks you down, calmly get up, smile, and say, "You hit like a bitch."
Who would have thought a book about a brain starts with that? Well, if you know Terry,
Well, every
it
chapter
does.
starts a little bit
I
like
know.
that.
If you want a
So
little
this
ass
this
kick.
this book is a work of, I don't know, love and frustration, I guess. And every chapter starts out with a little quote, little snarky quote, and a little bit of a life story about me, and then we get down to business about nutrition, lifestyle, brain health, amino acids, all the things I talk about. So it's nice and small. Good to have next to your bedside.
It's
Yes.
perfect next to your bed. Where can people
Yes.
find Your Best Brain, Terry?
You can find this links in bios, and also you can find it on Amazon. So
Yay.
Your Best Brain. Only leave me 5-star reviews per usual. Jen and I only like
Okay.
5-star
Well, that's all we
reviews.
like.
So
If you don't like it, well, that's too bad. Go find somebody else to read a different book then. There's a
that's
million books
right.
out there. Yeah. So we need to talk about this topic today because as per usual, Terry and I spend all this time prepping for these podcasts, which includes us sending 1,000 text messages back and forth
Only
about
1,000.
how pissed off we get as we start to dig into these rabbit holes, talking about the topic like this one, which is we're going to cover a lot. We're going to talk about civil commitments. We're going to bring a little politics into this and talk about how it's actually not politics and how people are making these red and blue issues out of something that
Yes.
aren't. We're going to talk about NAMI and the bullshit that actually is NAMI. If you don't have a lot of information about the National Alliance of Mental Health, mental illness, and we're going to talk about that as it relates to the state of Oregon and a state passed issue that they're trying to pass right now about civil
Yeah, we need to talk
commitments.
about this. Right.
So
Yes.
let's rock. Let's get
So,
into it.
yes. Okay. So this topic was kind of born on TikTok, if you will, for me, because
Oh.
I tried my hardest to tell people that RFK Jr. is not rounding people up for civil commitments and sending them to wellness farms or camps or whatever it is. And I actually, a lot of people are like, yes, he said that, blah, blah, blah. And now I've been saying, send me the video. Then send me the video that he actually says that, because this has been fact checked multiple times that he has not said this. I don't care if you like him or hate him. He has not said this. Okay. Which then makes this topic a political topic, because just because you don't like, Republican doesn't mean that he said these horrible things, right? Or that the Republican Party is out to civilly commit anyone. Okay. So I kept thinking about this, and I found the original video actually that where he was talking, and this came from prison reform. So this is where Jen gets a little geeky because she's she was more involved in the whole prison system for a longer period and most recently than I. So so I got real interested in this topic because I wanted to understand what it meant, and then suddenly, right underneath your noses, a blue state, decides to push forth commitment reform, making it easier for you to get civilly committed if you have a mental health issue. And I would guess an addiction issue as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it got me thinking. I was like, oh wow, this really isn't political. If it was political, it wouldn't be coming from a blue state and a blue governor.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, this is really fascinating, because if you want to push this being only a red issue or a blue issue, it is not. As a matter of fact, it's not even a federal issue.
Yeah.
It's a state issue.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, makes it even more fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes. So here's to all the people that are saying that this is a federal Republican issue and they're all after us. Yeah, no, it's not. You've got a
No.
state right underneath your nose trying to expand how to civilly commit. So I think it might be an important thing to just briefly touch on how things generally stand for civil commitments. right? For people to understand that, because right now, civil commitments in the majority of states, each state I think is a little bit different. They've got a little bit different laws and things like that. Um, but in general, and Jen, chime in if you're hearing something that's incorrect. In general, you have to be at risk to self or others, like
Yeah.
ending your life or ending someone else's life. It's pretty
Imminent.
extreme.
It's got
Yes,
to be imminent. It's got to
right
be
now.
extreme. Yep.
Right now.
Yes.
Okay? And that's important to know because it's a right now situation.
Mhm.
Um this new law, and apparently Oregon has tried to, it's the state of Oregon.
Yep,
Newsflash.
we're talking about
Anyway,
Oregon,
we're
so if
talking
we
about
got any
Oregon.
listeners from Oregon, perk your
Yeah.
ears up, people, and,
Yes.
tell your friends to start
Yes.
listening to this episode. Uh-huh.
Yes,
Yep.
and, NAMI is leading the charge on this, which is really interesting because NAMI has influence across the entire country.
Yes, in
Big
an
influence.
article that we're gonna be talking about here, there's an Oregon group, right, which is NAMI, that
Mhm.
wants to make it easier to commit those that are in mental health crisis. And the Oregon chapter of NAMI, okay, indicates that they don't want to be the ones that are leading this charge, but because of how problematic this is for the state of Oregon, and how problematic it is for the state specifically within their Department of Corrections, because the only way to receive true commitment type services that you would get if you were civilly committed, right, is to go through the correctional system. They are deciding, their charge is that is not okay for people, and then instead of putting them in the prison systems, we need to commit them to state hospitals so that they don't end up in the legal system. Even though they don't want to take on this charge, they say that they need to. So
Well, I feel the same way. I didn't wanna take on the charge of the Gaslit Truth podcast, but I felt
damn,
like I needed
yeah,
to.
we kind of had to.
Yeah.
Like, I know
You
this one's a
know?
little big, but you know what? Who cares? We're gonna go for it, right? So
Right.
so that
Yes.
that is so that so what they did is they ended up putting together, it was actually this last fall, NAMI ended up putting together a draft, document for a legislative concept on civil commitment. And what the most important thing that stood out for us in this document, right, was this whole 30-day thing. So let's talk a little bit about what Oregon is proposing, because once one state starts this, guys,
Oh, once the match
yep,
is lit, the
yep,
wildfire starts.
yeah.
So, yeah, so this is the deal, right? And it's
Oh, she lost volume. All of a sudden she stops. Okay, if you guys are watching YouTube right now, you'll see Terry in a full panic. She's trying to, oh, she's taking the flag off her mic. Now she's pushing it back in. This is very fascinating. So what Terry is trying to say, I'm going to wait to see if she comes on. We have no audio at all for her. So she is completely paused. So what? Oh,
okay,
she's
I'm
back.
back, I think.
I was
Am
just
I
about to
back?
talk about the
I don't know what
30-day
happened,
thing.
like, all my
And you're
audio
back.
just
All right.
decided to crap.
So
Anyway.
finish your sentence. The deal is
I
you were going
forgot
to
my
talk
deal.
about the 30 days and what this
Oh,
fortune telling is that providers are going to be given the luxury of being able to do.
right. So, right now, as Jen and I talked about, it is an imminent risk, meaning right now, like they assess,
Yes.
like right now, today.
Yep.
The 30-day, like they're saying now that they want us, I'm going to say us, mental health care people,
Yep.
to assess risk somehow
Mhm.
for the next 30 days. Is this person going to be a risk to themselves or others within the next 30 days? And I don't even know how to do that.
Let me give the detail,
Yeah.
of what that means. So the potential proposal that NAMI is putting out is defining danger to others, okay, which is any statements or attempts to inflict serious physical harm, okay, on another person that would place a reasonable person in fear of imminent physical harm.
A
Okay.
reasonable
I
person.
I know here's the word reasonable, okay, which that shows up in a lot of the verbiage throughout
Sure.
our jobs. Like, I don't
Yes.
know, it's like, well, would a reasonable person do this? Well, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know. I mean, my God, I'm from the backwoods. We do a lot of stupid shit. It's fine. Like, and then they also define danger to others as likely to inflict a serious physical harm on another person within the next 30 days. You are likely to inflict serious physical harm on another person within the next 30 days. So that's part of it. Then they define danger to self. Danger to self is statements or
This is
attempts.
also they want this to be a the broader, I believe. The danger to self
Yes.
is
Yes. The
broader.
danger to
Mhm.
self is statements or attempts to inflict serious physical harm to yourself. So, statements or attempts. Statements, by the way, people. Okay. Do you know how many clients I have that I work with that make statements that are dangerous when stated, but the intentions and the means and the drive and all these things behind doing this this is a totally different thing, right? So the fact that this is so broad really bothers me because as clinicians we are trained in it's not just a statement. We assess intent, we assess mean, we assess their history, we assess their support systems, we assess whether or not they had a relationship that just went to shit in their life and they have vulnerability factors,
Right.
right? Let's spell
Yes.
all that out. But no, this is pretty general. Okay. So statements or attempts to inflict serious physical harm to yourself, including statements and attempts of suicide, by which a behavioral health clinician, this is us now, would reasonably conclude that the person is at a significant risk of harm within the next 30 days.
Now, so I get worried about being a mental health in that position.
Yep.
And what if something happens within the next 30 days? There's already a massive liability to mental health. I don't know if people know this. Like, if someone ends their life under your care,
Yep.
like you can be investigated for that,
hmm
right?
Yeah, I can tell you in the Department of Corrections, the after action reviews are horrific.
Oh, I was
Been there.
involved in one.
You have
It
too,
was
right?
terrible.
So
Mhm.
yeah, this dials in clinicians is anyone who's a behavioral health clinician. So this is our licensed psychiatrists, psychologists, NPs, clinical social workers, licensed professional counselors, physicians, interns, or residents working under the board approved supervisors. Okay, or any other clinician whose authorized scope of practice includes mental health diagnosis and treatment.
Mhm.
So basically, we have to find a way to not only assess imminent risk, maybe more so, but not even that, but in the next month, are you going to harm yourself or somebody else? I mean, if that's the criteria, I
I don't
mean,
know what
let's
kinda we should start selling crystal balls or
I
something.
think so. I think so. And I'm not trying to go back onto like evidence-based approaches here, but this is really fucking general. So if we're gonna take a really hard look at this, right? I really think this does a disservice. People will be afraid to do this. Like what'll start
People are
happening
gonna
is
be afraid to talk about
the
this. People are gonna be
yes.
afraid to tell their
So
clinicians anything.
we are going to
Mhm.
keep secrets because
Yes.
this is not I don't know if this is going to be super helpful. There's a level of iatrogenic care that this like sits with me and we worked in the prison system and had a lot of very
Mhm.
mentally ill inmates come through, which we're going to talk about this other agenda behind the civil commitment thing that's happening, right?
Mhm.
But it sits at a level of iatrogenic care for me just because this is almost putting the power in the hands of, I'm going to say sometimes the wrong people. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And it's going to silence the people who struggle with mental illness. It's going to silence the people who are going through withdrawal and are having suicidal ideation from going through medications that they're getting off of and them not telling their clinicians. I would have been civilly committed twice in the last year in my decreasing of Lexapro had I went to someone and shared my true thoughts on what was happening in my brain. If I
Mhm.
lived in Oregon and this was passed, I would have been civilly committed twice on two occasions that I could feel very confident in saying. So it's going to silence people too.
That's what I keep thinking about because even if you come in, like, what's the assessment? I don't know what the assessment is. If you were to come in and talk to your clinician about you being very depressed and
Yeah.
not showering or not eating very well and things like that, like,
hmm
as a clinician, is the
Yeah.
charge going to be, "This is a civil
Yeah.
commitment," you know?
Yeah.
And what if you don't, right?
hmm
What if you don't proceed with the civil commitment? What is the liability to the clinician as well? Like,
Yeah.
there's 2 parties in this, right? There's the
hmm
client, and then there's the clinician.
Yeah.
And, in private practice particularly, right? What is your liability in all of this, and how are you going to be held accountable? And so are you also
hmm
gonna be, like, essentially pulling the trigger on this too quickly,
Yes.
right?
It's kind of a scary thought as a clinician.
It's very scary.
Yeah, because where is that level of reporting then? Especially if you're somebody who really knows that your client is going to be in an okay space, but what they're going through right now is some tough shit, you know?
Mhm,
Now, it does say in here factors the court can consider, but, you know, not limited to, is past behavior that has resulted in physical harm to self or others. So here comes some of this backstory with people, right? Past
mhm,
patterns of deteriorating, past patterns of relevance of like the frequency or the severity of past behavior, which I do think that that matters as well. We have to take people's history into account. But I also think that working with a lot of chaptered inmates in the prison system who we were forcing to take psychiatric or medical medications,
mhm.
past behavior became so relevant that current functioning didn't matter anymore. And
Yep.
it kept you committed. Okay. So I did a lot of work with people in that space too in the years that I was working in
Mhm,
the prison system. So let's talk then about that part of this, Terry, because there is an agenda, especially in the state of Oregon. There is an agenda to why they want to civilly commit people, that has to do with prison reform.
mhm. Which goes back into the original conversation with RFK Jr. because that's what he was talking about, prison reform
Yeah.
and people who want, a better life after they get out of prison or in
Yeah.
lieu of prison, they can go to these places and learn, trades and,
Mhm.
do the wellness farm type thing. What I think what people don't realize, and I just want to have a little caveat, is
Yeah.
those things already exist in the world. Like wellness farms exist. There are rehabs that already exist that teach trades and vocational things.
Yep.
There's long-term rehabs, one's in Hawaii. It's a 3-year program that does all of that. So people are like, "Oh my gosh," I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, you guys just don't really understand the landscape of addiction recovery and the programs that are available.
Yeah.
Not all programs are great programs. I'm not just talking about this style, but any
Mhm.
programs. Like it can also
Yeah.
be very predatory at the same time. But these do already exist. But I think he was just he made a comment, and it was very interesting to me because this is very true in the state that we live. Most prisons are in very rural communities, and so he would like to use those rural lands for these wellness opportunities.
Mhm.
And I'm like, he's not wrong.
Mhm.
Most prisons are, anyways, in our state, built in rural communities, except one that I can think of, but that's still a rural community. It's in the
Yeah.
middle of the community, but that's
Yep.
still like a rural town. Anyway, so that's where the entire statement came from. So it's kind of interesting that NAMI is now looking at this with Oregon and Oregon State because of their prison reform that
Yep.
they're proposing.
Yes.
So prison reform is always a huge topic amongst federal and state lawmakers, if you ask me, and
Yeah.
it really depends upon who's in office at the time. Jen and I have talked about this here too. Like if whoever is in office at the time depends upon how much funding you're going to get or where it's
Yeah.
going to go, programming, blah blah blah, all that stuff.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's what dictated whoever was the governor and whatever the governor's
Yep.
agenda was in the state that we lived in, right? Working in the prison
Hmm.
system, we just waited and that agenda would trickle itself down then to the administrator of the Department of Corrections, and then it would trickle down to the warden levels,
Hmm.
and then would trickle down to the psych levels, and then that's what we would do. If we received funding on something or there was an initiative, that was the flavor of the week, and that's what
Yep.
we pushed.
Yep.
So
And
it
it
really
changes.
is.
It
It
can
does.
change. The
Mhm.
next administration can come in and the whole thing gets
We'd hold our
uprooted
breath
and
and we'd
changed.
sit there
And
and wait for the next election, and then it
yep.
would happen all over again. And instead of focusing so much on this evidence based model, then we focused on this model. And it was just a
Yes.
constant bounce, right?
Hmm.
This bill that's being proposed as it relates to the prison reform, this bill that NAMI's putting together, that they're authoring, is going to change the current law in a few ways. One is allowing a judge to consider the person's past suicide attempts, potential harm to themselves within 30 days, which we just talked about. Okay. Rather than immediately when assessing that person's risk. Without treatment, people are going to wind up facing criminal charges where they are ordered into care after being deemed not competent to stand trial. And then they also talk a lot about how without treatment or without being civilly committed, most of these people are just going to end up committing criminal acts, going into the justice system that exists in the state of Oregon. So I think that's interesting to me One, because and I just say I don't live in Oregon. Like I don't know how bad or good the Oregon
Maybe some of our listeners do, and they
Department of
can
Corrections
drop
is. If
us
you want to
a
chime in, you let us know.
right.
I can tell you, I know in the state that we live in, our correctional system, and God, if any of my inmates were listening, they'd be like, Miss Schmitz, you are so full of shit, right? But it's pretty dialed in. We
They
have
don't know because they haven't been any other place,
and it's
so
pretty damn dialed in. Like now,
yes,
when they
it
go to a
is.
federal system, they come back and they're like, "Oh my God, we're so happy to be back here!" Right? I'm like,
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah, I
I
know.
know.
Mhm.
But something that I think is interesting is if we're going to commit, if we're civilly going to commit more people in an attempt to decrease the amount of people that are ending up in the Department of Corrections. Okay. I think that would mean then that whatever that civil commitment entails, right? So in the next 30 days, you may do something. One, it would have to entail very swift commitment, meaning the day that this is deemed an issue, which contraindicates this 30-day thing. But the day this is deemed an issue, we're going to have to get you committed and get you receiving services immediately. But then the services you receive, they're going to need to be for a minute. Like it can't be in 30 days, you're done and you're out, which many commitments that occur, in psychiatric hospitals, guys, they're not there for 6 months. They're
They're
not
there for
there for a
3 to 5
year.
days usually, like
Here you go. We get you in, we pump you full of some meds, we'll get you some assessments, and within a short period of time, you're out. Let me tell you, in the Oregon Department of Corrections, the median length of stay is 69 months. Okay. So, 5 years at least plus, people are average staying within their system. Okay. So, if you think about that for just a minute, yes, there's a tax dollar piece going to this, right? It's going to cost the tax dollars more. They are a state that is tax funded, government funded by the taxpayers, right?
mhm.
But if you're that ill and you go into a system that is going to help you for years and offer you rehabilitative services and psychiatric services versus a system that's going to take you, check you into the hotel, give you what you need, and check you out in a few weeks, is that effective?
I don't even know what that is because okay, for the most part, and some people do get committed longer, or they stay longer,
They do.
but for the most part, it's about 3 to 5 days is the
Mm.
commitment time.
Yep.
Now, you can be committed to medication and things like that for longer, that's a different
Yep.
story, right? Or maybe it's not, I don't know, maybe I'm conflating the 2 things, I don't know, but,
You
when
can.
you
Yeah.
get into inpatient treatment, like a committed inpatient treatment, and you have to stay because you're a threat to self, you're staying there for a short amount of time. And
Yep.
all they're doing, really, just like Jen said, is putting you on a bunch of medications and making sure that you're not going to do what you're there to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. You're kind of in a holding tank. And I think the general public has a wrong impression about what inpatient treatment is, that it should just kind of like prison care, actually. It
Yes.
should be more therapeutic. It
Mhm.
should be more, helpful. It should be helping you with your mental, but that's not what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
It's designed so that you don't hurt yourself or someone else. That's
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Period. Okay? So, although there might be some groups that you can attend, how therapeutic are you going to get in 3 to 5 days? Like, not really. You can't even establish a rapport in that amount of time,
Yeah.
with your treatment team,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. And so we know, I mean, even in the state that we live in, we know that individuals who have serious mental illness, they are at a much higher risk and higher likelihood to commit criminal activity. Like that
Which is
that is
really funny because this is another little nugget that
yeah.
people don't like to talk about. Like,
No.
mentally ill are not aggressive. They're not in general. But yet you just said they're
Mhm.
more likely to commit crimes and go to
Sure.
jail and prison. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
it doesn't mean that they're like super, right, like these crimes are very aggressive crimes,
Some
okay?
of them are.
Some of them are though,
Yeah.
right? So we
Yes.
kind of convolute all of these topics, right? Make them about
Mhm.
something that they actually aren't. But when you look up even the Oregon Department of Corrections, okay, recent studies suggest that 16% of inmates in the jails and prisons there, okay, have a serious mental illness. And then it goes on to say a few decades ago, that percentage was much less. It was 6.4%. So when we're looking at the number of seriously mentally ill people that are ending up in the system, okay, this is saying, okay, an average of 16% gives another statistic of the total men and women incarcerated in the state. 14.6% of men, 40% of the women were diagnosed with severe mental illness. So if these people truly do have severe mental illness, we're talking schizophrenia, major depressive, bipolar disorder, these things.
Mhm.
So if they do have them, we're going to put them into a facility that is going to offer short-term solutions, band-aid solutions. And I'm not saying putting them in the prison system is right, but what I can say is that when you're living in a prison system for years, you're going to get some care. You're going to get a different level of care than you're going to get than if you are in an inpatient facility committed for 20 days.
Likely. That also depends upon the prison system, though. We can
It
get
does.
into, like, the,
It does. That's why I
private
have to,
prisons versus
yeah,
the public, you know
yes.
what I mean? There's a whole
And I'm
conversation there.
again, that's my caveat before was
Yeah.
I know
Yep.
the prison system in one state and multiple prisons I've worked in. I cannot speak to Oregon,
Yep.
but to me, this concept is very interesting
Why don't
that
they put the opportunity in the prison then? Like, why aren't the opportunities more placed in prison systems? If they're worried about that, why not make prison systems more rehabilitative than they are right now? You
Mhm.
know, why not make the exit out of prison more rehabilitative as well instead of punitive, right? So,
Right.
but wait a minute, that's exactly what RFK Jr. said.
Yeah.
He wants
But
to make
we
the
can't,
exit
yeah.
out of prison more
Mhm.
rehabilitative, and I
Mhm.
think I can go along with that idea. Like because I
Yeah.
think we need it. Because how
Mhm.
many guys, I mean, and women get released and they don't really have a solid
Yeah.
plan,
They don't. They don't have a lot of solid release plans.
right?
It's sad. I mean, I would put together as a supervisor of a lot of the social workers in the state that we are in. I would help my staff put together plans, which included like being released to a hotel and being given a few hotel vouchers. And
Right.
that was what it was for them
Yep.
because the county that they lived in was so far north that there were no services there for them.
Right.
And most of these
Jails are
individuals,
even
yeah,
worse.
most of these individuals were had a level of mental illness. There was a level of care that we had to give to them. They were, our codes we would put on them. There were mental health 1, mental health 2, meaning they were taking a psychiatric medication or receiving a service. And those couldn't always be continued out in the community for them. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of stuff, at least in the state we are in, that was a lot more progressive with some of that, which was
Mhm.
great. It really was. But
Again, county dependent.
yes, county
Mhm.
dependent. That's right.
Mhm.
Because when you live so far up north, that there are not services for you, you're being released to a Motel 6, and that's where you're going to go. And that's
Yeah.
all there is to it, right? There aren't
Mhm.
options for you. So, but I think about this idea of what we know to be psychiatric hospitals and the type of care that's given. Now, to give NAMI credit, they talk about this in this idea. They say that what they are proposing is going to require a shit ton of resources and funding
Mhm.
to go to psychiatric facilities because they
Mhm.
could never hold what would likely come their way. They wouldn't be able to handle it because a lot of it is ending up in the prison system.
Mhm.
Um, I would argue that not only could they hold that influx of who's coming in, but to sustain actual helpful care for them.
That's the
Um,
tricky part.
that I think is the tricky part because these facilities, I mean, we're going to swing the pendulum back to where we were in the 20s and 30s with
Mhm.
psychiatric hospitals and housing people for a very long time. But part of me also goes, but for true care, that's what prisons do. And it works well because
Well,
people stabilize themselves in these places because they need more than 30 days. They need more
right.
than
They
a
need more than
week.
3 days
Like,
or 5 days, and I have an argument here too because y you typically don't civilly commit someone who is in active addiction, okay?
no.
So this is weird to me
Or
too
active
because
withdrawal.
or active withdrawal,
You would
right?
not civilly
You
commit
would
active
not.
withdrawal. No.
Exactly. But I would argue that if you're shooting heroin in your veins,
Mhm.
you are at risk to self
Yes.
of ending your life. Now, is that, I mean, I guess I look at suicide as being intentionally wanting to take your own life. When you are in active addiction, I would guess that some people are. They're playing roulette. I don't care if I live or die. I'm going to do
Yeah.
this with, I don't care. The consequence is death, you know. But where's that? Like, where's the treatment? Do you know how many people out here suffer, like parents and things like that, because their kids are on the street actively using and they know they're going to die. They know that they have a high risk of dying.
Yeah.
Where is the outcry for that population? You
Mm.
know, you can't go to the court and civilly commit your son because he is shooting heroin. You can't do it.
Yep.
And I would argue that that is also a mental illness. You know what I mean? I would argue that at least when they're using that they have a mental illness going on, you can't not, you know? So I
Yes.
don't know. This whole thing just is mind boggling to me.
I know, it's
Where
such a
does it
rabbit hole.
end? Well, where does it end?
It's such a
Where does it
rabbit
end?
hole.
And then I
Yep.
think of the homeless population, right? Like, isn't that harm to self or threat of harm to self within the next 30 days?
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
you are going to be in the frigid cold. Isn't that harm to
Mhm.
yourself? Like, but is it, so do we have to gauge like, well, they didn't mean to freeze to death. That's just where they're living, but yet they froze to death anyway.
Yeah.
They didn't mean to overdose. Therefore, it doesn't fit the commitment, you know.
Sure.
And I'm
Yeah.
like, where does that end? Like, and where are the resources for the people that are just living like that? There's nothing. The resources that you have available are if you're an imminent threat to yourself or others, and now it's within the next 30 days. And I feel terrible for any mental health professional in Oregon having to assess a 30-day risk.
Yes. Because I do believe in this word. Okay, the word imminent is in this draft proposal that they put out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's where the semantics piss me off. Just like the semantics with addiction versus dependence. All these,
Yep.
we're constantly trying to
We
put these
argue over the
labels.
wrong
We
things.
argue over the stupidest shit. Okay. So as a therapist, right, I see the word imminent also in the same fucking line as 30 days. Okay. First of all, those two things completely contraindicate one another, and it puts people in these boxes like where not only are we supposed to assess risk right in the moment, but we're also supposed to again fortune tell, right, and go, well, you know, it's very likely
Mm-hmm.
that a reasonable person would believe, with the education and knowledge that I have, that there is a high likelihood that this person in the next month is going to engage in X, Y, and Z behavior. Okay. I don't. I can appreciate trying to expand some of this criteria for the function of like trying to offer services to people that aren't just you're going to end up having to go to jail or prison to get services. I can
Right.
appreciate that. But to me, that's not what this feels like, because it's just so subjective. And it's also asking us to really, truly fortune tell
Yes.
what is going to be happening to somebody. Now, we could determine imminent risk based off history and all of these factors now in the moment. In the next day, like hour, 2 hours, today, is someone going to harm themselves?
And
What
by
can I
the
do to
way,
keep them
in
safe?
private practice, I think it's harder because people know what not to say,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
so I have had a couple people take their life in private practice,
Yeah.
and I was in oblivion.
Yep.
I had no idea. The same rules didn't apply as what we heard when we were trained in prison
Yep.
or any of our trainings on this.
Mhm.
It didn't,
Yeah.
because people know better, and I think most people don't tell you that this is
Yeah.
going to happen. They
Yeah.
don't. They Yeah, and so
So
anyway, it's
you you got a
what?
mixed agenda here of mental health, civil commitments, prison reform.
Yeah.
Then we bring in this international organization that is supposed to be there okay, whose
Mhm.
roots and bones are to help people, and they are leading this charge. And let's talk about NAMI for just a hot second. As if you're on YouTube right now, you guys had to pull YouTube up and see if you're not, but
You could see
I,
Jen's shoe in the
you can
just
see
kidding.
clearly. Okay, this image I have. Someone in my home has been searching
Searching
for the
shoes.
best men's walking shoe.
That's funny. I said it could be worse. The ad on there could
I
be
know.
a lot
I'm like,
worse,
"Oh,
but
man, I gotta
yeah.
screenshot this," and nope, we didn't have time to do all that, right? I'm like, "You know what? I mean, it could be, like, some real crazy shit I'm into, so
Mhm.
I'll go with the men's walking shoe." But let's talk about this graph. Let's, talk about NAMI and where NAMI receives funding from, and
Tsunami was in
has.
big trouble for this. Like a big spotlight was shown on them because of all the funding that they received from Big Pharma.
Yep, 2009, actually, the New York Times posted an article on this, and that the drug makers are advocacy groups' biggest donors, and it was tied to NAMI. When you look
Mhm.
at this graph we have up here, you can see that pharma funded a good chunk of NAMI. Um, and let's see, we've got
All but what,
Pfizer,
15%?
Wyeth, Arthur McNeil, BMS, Lilly, and AstraZeneca. All of their funding in '09 came from pharma except for 15%.
That's ridiculous.
I wonder what other
That's
is, right?
ridiculous. Yeah,
So,
I wonder what
okay,
other means in that
like, all
context. Like, what
right,
does that
yes,
mean?
this is old. Okay, like, yes, this is
Mhm.
not recent. However, and if we dug more, I'm sure we'd find more stuff, and I'm gonna stop sharing the screen here. But this is very interesting to me,
Mhm.
because they are such a popularly known coalition, in the mental health space too. I
Well,
mean,
I
we
have a
we
question.
we
I have
grew
a
up listening to
question.
NAMI and getting
Yeah,
info on NAMI.
if big pharma is funding things like NAMI, who does a lot of, like, advocacy work about everything's mental illness, right? And so, of course it is, because then big pharma will get more money through prescribing, blah, blah, blah. Why don't we make big pharma just give money to prison reform? Why
Mhm.
don't we make them get without influence, just
Yeah.
cash,
No third
you know?
party intermediaries here. Like, it's not going through another organization, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Go ahead and write a check for $15 million and have it go straight to the charge, the people actually that are doing it. Yeah.
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 Like,
Let's do that. Cool.
why don't they fund prison reform? Why don't they fund,
Mhm.
inpatient stays, but not influence, right? Like, why can't they do
Mhm.
that in the federal and state government? Say, like, you have to give back a certain part of your profits for actual care and reform, you
Yeah.
know? And I think we can probably wrap this up after this little caveat, unless you've got something else. But I think,
No.
like, why can't Oregon, like
Mhm.
Oregon's governor, instead of, and I'm not saying they are explicitly doing this, but instead of turning their back on the RFK Jr. stuff that he's doing with wanting to do with prison reform and mental illness and things like that, instead of making this a partisan issue, I think there's a huge collaborative value that can happen here. Like, because it's happening under your noses without influence of the other party, right? But
Yep.
I'm thinking they are so close to being on the same page here.
Yep.
They are so close. But why can't we just listen? Right? We are so close. Like,
Mhm.
this is,
It's almost like the messages, like the overall end results are the same.
yeah,
Like, we're preaching the same damn message, but it's about how we get there, and
yeah.
this is where this split is happening, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yep. Because I don't hear anybody talking about this Oregon thing, even though to me that's fucking scary.
mhm,
I don't, I saw it. I happened to come across it on Google or something, and I was like, "Wait, what is this?"
mhm.
And I'm like, "But I don't see an outcry on TikTok over that. There should be. People
Mhm,
should be freaking the F out over that."
mhm.
Because to me that's kind of scary. A 30-day, like, look ahead, and I'm sorry, but I think clinicians should be like, "What?"
Yeah. Yeah, any of those
They should be
licensed
leading the
professionals,
charge.
yeah, those
Yeah.
licensed professionals should really be taking a hard look at that and
Yes.
starting to push
So
back a
thank
bit.
you, NAMI and Oregon, for telling me
Mhm.
that I need to learn how to be a fortune teller
Yeah, well, thank
now.
you for putting us in such a compromised position,
Yes.
that really truly goes beyond our scope, of what
Yeah.
practices really.
Yeah.
Um,
And
that's
putting
how
all
I
the liability on us.
yes.
Thank you.
Oh,
Mhm.
good job. Hmm. Well, with that,
Listen, we are better together.
we
Mhm.
we could talk about this for days. But we're going to wrap up here. We are the Gaslit Truth Podcast, and you have successfully listened to this awesome episode. Food for thought. Get curious, get inquisitive. Make sure that you get online, give us some stars, give us some ratings, tell us what you think. If you're so inclined, buy us a coffee, because guess what? We got to
Ooh.
fund this somehow, because Big Pharma ain't giving us shit for this show.
They
And,
should.
I don't know. Thanks for
Send us
listening,
your
guys.
Gaslit Truth at the Gaslit Truth Podcast at gmail.com. 5-star ratings only, folks. All
Right.
right. Until
Bye,
next time.
everybody.
See ya.